Before I show you the quotes, I want to tell you about an experience I had today when I was visiting my doctor in New York. And he pulled me aside afterwards and basically said, he's never examined Joe Biden. He's not one of those doctors who likes to diagnose from afar. But he said what about 70% of America said, he's a great doctor. He said, there's no way this guy's up to being president. And this is, to be clear, someone who very much would not like to see Donald Trump be president. I got an email from one of you, I won't say who because I didn't get permission in advance, who's about Joe Biden's age, who is cognitively as sharp as he's ever been, a super sharp guy. And he said, there's just no way our party could possibly go forward. And both those statements were made before this. Let's put up the first quote. These are quotes from the special counsel's report, Robert Hur's report, who said in part he wasn't going to indict Joe Biden, not just because he's a sitting president, but at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. Okay? Now the next portion from the report. Sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. Not the description you'd want for a president. Next, please. Next, go ahead and put up the next excerpt from the report. And I'll read it to you because some of you probably can't see it. In his interview with our office, and again, the president sat over 2 days for interviews with the special counsel, Mr. Biden's memory was worse. He did not remember when he was vice president, forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended. If it was 2013, when did I stop being vice president? And forgetting on the second day of the interview when his term began. In 2009, am I still vice president? He did not remember even within several years when his son Beau died. And his memory appeared hazy when describing the Afghanistan debate that was once so important to him. Among other things, he mistakenly said he had a real difference of opinion with General Carl Eikenberry, when in fact Eikenberry was an ally who Mr. Biden cited approvingly in his Thanksgiving memo to President Obama. Clearly, one of the main reasons, besides the fact that he's behind in the polls, that a lot of Democrats think it would be political suicide to go forward with Joe Biden as the nominee, are these questions about his capacity. Anyone who's known Joe Biden knows that he's not anywhere near what he was even a few years ago. And this report from the special counsel, special counsel, is going to get a lot of attention, and it's going to raise a lot of questions. I want to go first to Melissa DeRosa, who is a Democrat, and a Democrat who's always willing to be honest. And Melissa, how big a deal do you think this is in the context of people in your party raising questions about whether Joe Biden has the capacity to beat Donald Trump and to be president for 4 years?
Thank you for having me, Mark. I'm excited to be here. I mean, look, it's a disaster. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's a disaster. And all it does is further reinforce what everyone says quietly to each other, whispering on the phone, in the room at fundraisers, over dinner, which is this concern that Biden appears to have lost a step. And the problem, obviously, translating into electorally in the ability to get elected with that hanging around his neck. Yesterday, he's in New York. He did a couple of fundraisers. The press reports out of that was that he continued to say the incorrect names of foreign leaders. Well, put that aside for a second, because, Trump does that too, right? Trump gets up and he says he confuses Nikki Haley for Nancy Pelosi, and they try to make a big deal out of that for a day. So it's one thing to do that, but to see in black and white in a special counsel's report, he's a nice old man that can't remember anything, is not what you want at the top of the ticket going into an election, particularly not when the stakes are this high with Donald Trump. So, I mean, look, Trump had a good day today in the Supreme Court. It looks like, he's going to be victorious there. Nikki Haley continues to, I think, sort of embarrass herself with what she's doing. It only makes him appear stronger. And then you drop this bomb. And for Republicans, it's a twofer, because to your point at the top, Mark, you're going to have a lot of people who say there's one standard of justice when it comes to Donald Trump and another one when it comes to Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. And then the second part of it, which is reading that document, that stark document, which is already plastered all over Twitter, where it's saying he can't remember the year he was elected. He can't, remember who his allies were. He can't remember within years when his son died. I mean, it's a disaster.
So we're going to talk about Donald Trump and the reasons he may not be the nominee. I've always said, not always, but I've said for a long time, if Joe Biden is not the nominee, it'll be because of one of the two H's. Hunter, if Hunter's convicted, I could see him pardoning him against his previous pledge not to and saying he's not going to run, or health. And the fact is, as you sort of suggested, there's nothing in the special counsel's report that's surprising. No one says, oh my goodness, the Joe Biden I've seen in public, of course he'd remember the year of his son's death, or of course he'd remember when he was vice president. It's not surprising. And poll after poll shows this. So I want to ask you, as someone who's been a Democratic strategist in tough situations, how should the White House handle this to minimize the damage of it? Or is there no way to?
I don't think there's a way to, because how do you tap dance your way out of this one? It's not, as I said, sort of the double standard that I think Biden unfairly gets when he says somebody's name incorrectly. Trump does the same thing, but Biden gets pummeled for it far worse than Donald Trump does. I mean, reading that document in black, it blew me away. And I'm somebody who's obviously a supporter of the president, who wants to see him get reelected, who wants Democrats to retain control of the White House. I think the stakes have never been higher, particularly against Trump. But when I read it, I was blown away. And so what do you do with that? I mean, I don't envy his chief of staff. I don't envy his press secretary. And again, I think that, there's two problems coming out of this report, because you also read that report and he did take classified documents. He did it knowingly and willfully. He did share them with his ghostwriter. And so you're going to hear a lot of people in the media saying, this is a double standard. Just because when his hand was caught in the cookie jar, he didn't behave the way that Trump did, the underlying conduct was the same. And so you're also going to have a situation where you have people, whether you agree or not, saying the justice system has been completely politicized. There's one set of rules when it comes to Donald Trump, and there's another set of rules when it comes to everybody else. And honestly, when I read that, I don't know how you argue your way out of that. Yeah. I think that this is a double barrel problem for Democrats in the White House.
Yeah. As always, we're going to want to take your questions, and I want to bring people in. I see a bunch of people on here I'd like to hear from, but I don't want to call on somebody who's not volunteered to speak. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, please turn your camera on. I want to turn to President Trump, and then again, I want to eventually get to this question of, are there situations where Joe Biden could somehow decide not to run or be told he can't run? President Trump's argument today in the Supreme Court over the question of whether the 14th Amendment allows states to keep him off the ballot. Normally I'm not a big fan of interpreting the justices' questions as a sign of how they'll eventually rule. But every analyst who watched it, including ones, again, who are not sympathetic to Donald Trump, believe this will almost certainly be a unanimous decision, striking down the Colorado precedent decision and saying that states don't have the capacity, at least in this instance, to keep Donald Trump off the ballot. So that's a good day politically for President Trump. Not a surprise, although there were some crazy rumors this morning that the Republican justices were going to use this opportunity to try to end the election by keeping Trump off the ballot. This is a time when, as I said, today, you got a guy who's behind, who the special counsel has just basically said doesn't have a great memory for some pretty important things. And being behind is a big problem. And as John Podorz wrote in his email to me, he thinks he'll stay behind. Melissa, one more question from you, and then I'm going to go to Doug Workman and other people who want to ask questions. Please raise your hand. Is as long as Joe Biden is behind in the polls, does that mean people will continue to speculate about and maybe bring up in public the notion that he should not run, or is it too late for him to change his mind?
I think it's too late for him to change his mind. And I think if he was going to change his mind, he would have done it. If anything, I think he's going to dig in and feel like now he really has something to prove. And, I was someone who in 2020, the first go around, obviously I was secretary to Governor Cuomo at the time, and we were fielding all of these rampant sort of rumors and incoming for months and months and months deep into 2020 with these theories that at the convention, they were going to swap Biden for Cuomo. Trump was obsessed with this concept. Karl Rove had put it in his head. It had been reported, at least according to Maggie Haberman. And it was something the press constantly asked about. And we would get these phone calls and be like, what are you talking about? That's never going to happen. And I sort of feel like, I'm with you. I think the only way that Biden doesn't run is the second H. I don't see the first H happening, but for health reasons, because I think I think he's in it. I think he's going to dig in and now feel like if anything, he's got something to prove. I don't see him walking away.
Yeah. Thank you, Melissa. We've obviously had tons of testimony, sometimes on background, sometimes on the record, from people who've worked with Donald Trump in the White House, many former Trump officials saying he's not fit. And they give lots of examples: not fit to be commander in chief, not fit to be president, not fit to be the leader of the country. But that's not going to force Trump off the ticket. The danger here, I think, for President Biden is this is a pretty neutral arbiter. His background is not pure Democrat or pure Republican in terms of his legal career. But this is someone who it's going to, I think, be raised. I haven't seen it raised yet, even on Twitter, where most everything does get raised. Why did he feel the need to put this in the report? You know, he didn't have to characterize the president's memory. It's not a legal matter, as far as I know. I'm curious about that. So if you've got a question, please raise your electronic hand or your physical hand and be on camera. Douglas Workman, if you're not unmuted, I don't think you are. You are unmuted. Go ahead, ask your question or make your comment. If you want to tell us how old you are, feel free. You look like you're in great shape.
I am eligible for Medicare. My question has to do with what you said in your newsletter today, Mark, and that is the lack of confidence in Vice President Harris. When you read all this stuff, and then all of a sudden you go, what the hell? Even if you're going to vote for Biden, you're looking at the possibility of Vice President Harris. The question for Melissa, is that worse?
It's funny because and that's the problem, right? And I did an interview a few weeks ago, and I said in it I thought they should have replaced Kamala from the ticket, and some people didn't love that I articulated that point. But generally speaking, a vice president doesn't help, but they also don't hurt. And in this situation, I think Kamala Harris actively hurts the ticket. And I think that the politics of the Democratic Party are such that the party elders would have a very difficult time should there be a movement away from Biden to choose anyone but Kamala. And her numbers are much worse. Her unfavorability is much higher, or, in the majority of polls. And at the same time, you have people out there saying, this is what's going to happen. Biden is going to get sick. And even if he gets reelected, he'll be out of office pretty quickly and you'll end up with Kamala Harris. And so, you've got the Biden age issue now in black and white in this report, as we see it translated in all the polls. And I think Kamala Harris, continues to compound it. It makes matters worse.
What's the alternative? I mean, what?
Look, I would replace her.
Melissa, you know full well that right now Joe Biden's biggest problem is with the base. If he loses support from the base on immigration or Israel or anything else, he'll go down to a 32% approval rating, which will be a horrible narrative and a bigger hole to climb out of. And if he replaces her unwillingly, and as far as I know, she's not willing to go anywhere. She wants to be the nominee. If he isn't, he'd destroy the party.
Well, look, listen, I think that there are other alternatives you could possibly explore that would not result in completely destroying the party, but your approval rating is irrelevant. It's the horse race. And I don't see a scenario with Trump on the ballot where that base stays home to that extent. And you're really fighting over the middle. And I think as long as the right can continue a narrative that says a vote for Joe Biden is a vote to make Kamala Harris president, you've got a problem. So look, you've got to circle the square somehow. And at some point, you've got to flip the chessboard over, because playing the game as we're playing it right now is not working. So we could just continue to do nothing. I think that's what we will continue to do. And just see, sort of how the chips fall. But if I were, advising them, I would say we need to do something to try to change the game a little bit. And again, traditionally, a vice president doesn't necessarily help, but in this instance, it actively hurts.
Can you replace her with anything but a woman of color?
Probably not.
So who would that be?
There are good options out there. I don't want to speculate, but there are alternatives out there that I think would be well qualified, strong candidates who the party could get behind. I don't accept that it's Kamala or nothing.
All right. Again, I'd love for you all to be raising your hands. The whole point of two ways to give you an opportunity to ask Melissa questions, me questions, make comments. There are many people on here I would love to hear from. I'm going to start calling on you if you don't raise your hands. But I will say this. I continue to believe, even in the wake of the special counsel's report and provocative language, I continue to believe that Joe Biden stepping down now and announcing he's not running would be worse for the Democratic Party. I just don't see a scenario where either Kamala Harris is stronger or the fight for the nomination at this point would elevate someone. And the other names that are mentioned, some of them are strong. I'm very bullish on Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania as being able to step in. But beyond that, I'm just not very bullish on them. And I know Joe Biden thinks that. He thinks he's been a great president. He thinks he's beaten Donald Trump before. He beat him again. And he thinks it would be chaos in the party. Either Kamala Harris is the nominee or someone else who would have to step in from scratch. Matthew Bartlett, New Hampshire never loses its relevance. Let's go to this. Matthew, stand by, because the president's talking. Thank you.
Stay focused on my job, like you do, of my job of being president. The line is the special counsel, in my case, decided against moving forward with any charges. And this matter is now closed. I'll continue to do what I've always done. Stay focused on my job, like you do, of my job of being president. That means going to work with all of you every single day I can. Thank you for being great partners. Just this week, House Democrats showed how united you are. You defeated Mayorkas' impeachment resolution. And I had no doubt he'd get out of his hospital bed and come in and vote. No, I'm not joking. I talked to him a little bit. Not
All right, we're going to keep
after,
monitoring
not
that.
before.
I will say, and this has been my understanding of President Biden's condition, that seemed fine. That guy didn't seem, to be incapable of doing the job. We saw it in the last Day of the Union. I predict we'll see in this one. When he's well rested, he's fine. And I wonder if somebody, it'd be a great chapter in a book someday. Why was he not rested, presumably, for his 2 special counsel interviews? Because when he's rested, he usually does pretty well. We'll keep monitoring that. Matthew, I'll ask you to unmute again. Sorry for the interruption. Thank you for who told me he's speaking.
Yeah.
Matthew, what do you think? How bad is this? And do you think there's a chance that one or both Biden or Trump are off the ticket?
I mean, it's just damning, like you said, to have his own Justice Department, seemingly go out of their way to describe his mental faculties like this is shocking. And as Melissa said, I'm not sure, how you spin this or how you create this. But what about the third party implications of this? Does this now encourage or embolden a third party, a no labels ticket? Does that help their viability, or does this further doom, the Biden campaign, or as if there is a campaign right now? It just seems as if the implications of this are so far downstream right now.
Yeah, I think that the issue, and if you read my exchange with John Podhoretz, the issue is you get polls every so often, Quinnipiac and others, that show Biden ahead nationally or doing well in Pennsylvania, even in Wisconsin. If he's not down 5 in every poll, I think Democrats are just inclined to stay with him and not look to a third candidate, not look to replace him, circle the wagons. Just to be clear, the remarks he was giving there was at the House Democratic retreat. My colleague has just texted me to say that the White House says that the interview, I don't know if it's the first interview, the second one, was the day after October 7th, and he was exhausted. So there's some great first draft of history for you, right? You've got Joe Biden, who probably would have rested up for that interview because they rest him up when he needs to do something that requires focus. And of course, he wasn't focused because from October 7th onward, he was dealing with the horrible implications of October 7th in Israel. And so now we know perhaps what happened. And we know that led to the special counsel writing this up. I'm still really interested in why he did, but we'll get to that. Matthew, thank you. Mr. Hanna, I'm trying to unmute you. Love for you to, again, everyone can reveal their age or not. You look like you're in great shape too, but what's on your mind, question or comment?
Thanks a million. I appreciate it. Talking about scenarios that might actually open up an option for Democrats to have a candidate other than Kamala Harris run with, seems to me the most perfect one from their standpoint would be an opportunity on the Supreme Court if a vacancy should occur. But if one should not, the next best thing would seem to me would be an opportunity, an opening on the DC Circuit Court. If either of those could occur, wouldn't that provide a face-saving way to get rid of Kamala Harris and to put someone else I hate to say it, but like Michelle Obama on the ticket in the number 2 spot.
Mr. Hanna, thank you for the question. That's a great plot twist in a Jeff Greenfield novel or The West Wing. But I will tell you that the Kamala Harris I know is not interested in a face-saving maneuver, not just because she wants to be president. Anyone who runs for president wants to be president, but because she thinks it would be embarrassing and unfair, as I understand it, not to be the nominee if Joe Biden is not the nominee. So she's not looking for a way out. And I don't think there's anybody who could convince her to look for a way out. And Joe Biden's long standing from the time he was often disrespected by the West Wing staff and sometimes by his boss, the president, when he was vice president, he's not looking to disrespect her. And he knows what would happen if he tried to replace her unwillingly. So again, I'm not ruling anything out, but people have talked about ambassadorships and Supreme Court. And of course, there is no Supreme Court vacancy. But I don't think that is the out here to replace her. I don't see that in the cards.
I think to your point, Mark, I think that she would need to, it would need to be Kamala on her own making the decision to put the party above herself. And I don't think that she's going to do it, right? If she would have done it, she would have done it by now. So I think that that's right. I don't think that there's a way out.
Wow. I'm looking for an email that I want to read you all. Just give me a moment to find it. This is one I mentioned earlier from one of Wide World of News reader who is every bit as concerned about Donald Trump becoming president as almost anybody I know. And this is before the special counsel report. This person wrote based on President Biden's mistaking German prime ministers yesterday. He said, "I know it is awkward to tell an old man such as myself that you can't do something, especially if he's president, but the country comes first before etiquette. I socialize with moderate Democrats. No one would dispute the state of Joe Biden's mental capacities." Michael Graham.
So I just watched a statewide campaign in New Hampshire where the Democratic Party with leaders like Jeanne Shaheen and the gang pulled out all the stops so that they could get Joe Biden through this campaign he refused to be a part of. He refused to be on the ballot. They got 125,000 people to drive out and vote for him. Then they go to South Carolina, where I grew up, and they got 96% of the vote as national figures poured in to say, Joe Biden, yes. Mark Halperin, do you really think they're going to turn around and say, oh no, Joe Biden, no? They have put their reputations on the line. They've said he's the guy. It's not just Biden who has a reputation on the line. These other people rally around him. And I got to tell you, the Democrats who spent the last 3 months that I watched insisting that he's completely fine are not going to now say, now that you mention it, the guy's got some problems.
Michael, what do you think about, because I don't want to just talk about Joe Biden as long as I have you, because you just spent a lot of time following the Republican race up in New Hampshire. What do you think, if any, the scenario is where Donald Trump's not the Republican nominee, besides if he drops dead?
The three magic words for 2023 and into 2024 are Republicans like Trump. And I think it's the hardest thing to grasp. It's a lesson I actually learned from this Wild Word of Something newsletter that I started reading a few months ago. They just like the guy. And when you go to campaign events and issues about his behavior and general craziness, and there are people who will look at you and say, I'm horrified by what he just said about I can break all the laws I want, and then they'll say I'm voting for him. And so there's a connection there. It's beyond the traditional politics that I like, which is where you talk about things and try to make decisions and debate things. It's a gut connection. And Mark Halperin, I want you to imagine it's 1908 and the Democratic hack versions of Mark Halperin and Michael Graham are sitting in a bar watching their party get ready to nominate William Jennings Bryan for the third time and going, bleeping William Jennings Bryan. I mean, nothing you could do, man. It's where the party is. He's a disaster. And in this case, of course, it's not necessarily a loss because of what we're talking about today with Joe Biden. Those comments in the DOJ report are just devastating. There's no way around them. And so one of the questions we're going to be asking Inside Sources, my news outlet, is we're going to be asking Democrats who've defended him in the past, do you still defend him? Are you glad you spent $250,000 getting a write-in candidacy to save him instead of having a governor of Michigan or governor of California challenge him and not end up in the same spot.
Noah Rothman has joined us. There's a lot of uncertainty in politics and uncertainty in this presidential race about whether Joe Biden will make it, whether Donald Trump will make it. Here's a certainty. Driving from Jersey to Brooklyn, you'll encounter traffic. So thank you for getting here. What's your general view of how damaging this stuff is from the special counsel?
What we saw this afternoon, really damaging, at least insofar as it confirms just about everybody's suspicions that the president is experiencing mental decline. But
let me stop you there. What does it matter that he confirms it? He's just some guy. As you said, people have these suspicions. Why is this different?
Well, now it's exculpatory. Now it's being used as an excuse to justify the justification for not prosecuting Joe Biden was he cooperated, unlike Donald Trump. That's valid. But at the same time, the counsel is saying he's mentally deficient. And he's the president of the United States. That's something that just about everybody should object to, or at least be concerned by. And the fact that it's confirmed by independent investigators now, however friendly and well-meaning he happens to be, he's suffering dramatically in cognitive capabilities. And there's no disputing that, which is something Democrats have tried to do. Karine Jean-Pierre today says, yeah, this is just the way of it. Right. This is something we all have to accept. I don't think voters have to simply accept.
I missed the briefing. What did she say? You have to accept that he's got a bad memory?
It just happens. If the president confuses Francois Mitterrand and the president of France currently, if he decides to revert back to the 80s and talk about how he's speaking with Helmut Kohl, yeah, that just happens. It's not something we should really judge him on, certainly not harshly. That's just not going to fly.
So Newt Gingrich now.
Go ahead. This is not a day you envy being the White House press secretary. But, and to Noah's point, I saw that screenshot on Twitter and I went to go look in the report myself because I couldn't believe it was true. And then I started texting it to a few people saying, did you see this? And the response I got from members of the media and high-level operatives are, wait, where is that from? So when you have people like that are shocked by nothing at this point, being that blown away by reading it in that black and white, I mean, this is going to be in every campaign ad. This is all you're going to hear on Fox. This is all you're going to see for the next however many months until the election. And I don't know how Karine Jean-Pierre standing at a White House press room lectern and saying it happens is not going to cut it.
Yeah. Newt Gingrich tweeted what you just said, Melissa, which is that he thinks this will be in lots of ads. And it's going to be difficult for Democrats to defend it when you've got this. No, what about this other issue, which again doesn't speak to whether he'll be off the ticket in any as linear a way as what we've been talking about? But what about this notion of the double standard, which Republicans are also talking about, although I don't think it's going to get as much attention, which is he basically said he was careless with classified documents in a variety of ways over a long period of time, but it's not something he would be indicted for.
Yeah. So intent matters. And as I think the special counsel Hur's report demonstrates that the president and his people cooperated with investigators, unlike Donald Trump, who did not cooperate, who refused to allow investigators to access the property, who moved documents in order to hide them from investigators. That's a material difference. I agree. And Republicans are going to argue against it and say it shouldn't really matter, but that's frankly a flippant argument. And I don't think it should carry the day. What's damning in this report, though, is the notion that Joe Biden is mentally ill-equipped to competently handle classified information. That's disqualifying. Point blank, simply disqualifying from having access to the presidency. And I think Republicans should make that case.
Mr. Lee, go ahead, Melissa, and then Mr. Lee.
I just want to say, I actually disagree with that. I mean, I think that just because Joe Biden cooperated, and I agree with you from a practical standpoint, materially, that is a difference. But I think that in poll after poll, you see an overwhelming number of Americans saying they do not believe the Justice Department, that the justice system has been politicized and weaponized. And the right echo chamber is just much better at this. And they're going to gloss over whether or not Biden cooperated, and they're going to hammer hard on the conduct was the same. He knowingly and willfully removed classified documents. He gave them to a ghostwriter to help write a book, which he financially benefited from. And they're going to say, in that instance, He's not getting charged, but Donald Trump is. And I think that you're going to see that help them further undermine the pending criminal cases that are sitting out there and make them, to the extent that they matter, which at this point I feel like they matter zero, they're going to matter even less.
Right. So we've got the first spin I've seen from a Biden ally about this issue of mental capacity. Senator Blumenthal says, I think this is the strongest thing I can imagine so far, that the special counsel shouldn't engage, quote, in speculation about the state of President Biden's memory. His mandate was to judge whether a crime was committed. What do you guys think of that?
Not speculation.
Can I say
It's not
something in relation to
speculation
that?
if that's
Might have had one bad day.
That's fair. He might have had
Or two bad days.
A handful of bad days,
Yeah.
to which we're all privy. It's not speculation. The investigators are giving their objective assessment of his capacity, his faculties, sitting across from him conducting an interview. That's not speculative. That's not conjectural. That's
I didn't say
evidence.
it was a cure-all. I just said it was the best I've heard so far.
Sure, fair enough.
Well,
And the problem is, though, Mark, if you've got Democrats coming out to shoot at this report, it's like you can't have it both ways. The report just cleared you. So you can't get up and on the one hand say, this report is great and good because it cleared me from criminal conduct, our guy from criminal conduct, but it was unfair because it speculated on something that, 80% of Americans agree with.
Well, I disagree. I think they can say this guy's job was the law. On the law, he cleared the president, and he's not a doctor. He's not in charge of evaluating the quality of the president's memory.
No, I agree. You can make that case, but I think you're going to look weak doing it.
Yeah. All right. Let's get Justice Michael Lee in, sir.
Yeah. Well,
Question or
can
comment?
I say something directly relevant to that, picking up on your speculation about why he would have said something like that? His job was to exercise a prosecutorial discretion as to whether or not to support a prosecution. One thing he had to turn his mind to is the likelihood of securing a conviction. There is a very big difference between someone who presents as calculated and knowing and dissembling about something to somebody who is, to use his words, sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Part of his job was determining the likelihood of a conviction and whether or not any gaps in memory are due to calculation, as I said before, dissembling, or a lack of memory. So the whole notion that it was somehow beyond his remit not to turn his mind to those things is frankly absurd.
I think the whole thing's a little bit absurd, though, because you can't indict a sitting president. So he was never going to recommend indictment, right? So he was kind of in this netherworld of, he could have been indicted or he did break the law. But that gets you into Comey territory where you're suddenly judge and jury and deciding whether crime was committed, right? If you can't actually charge, you can't really do the job of a prosecutor.
No, but the report had to still form a view about, he does refer at the end of the report to the fact that he couldn't proceed because of the fact that he couldn't present an indictment while he was the president, but he was still required, given the nature of the job he was undertaking, to form a view about whether there was a case that could have supported an indictment. But that's the whole point of the exercise.
Yeah, no, I know, but it's to say there's a case, he can't properly convict the guy, right? I mean, that's not a proper thing. Unless you're Jim Comey, that's not a proper thing. Let's go to Pete. Pete, love to hear your question. Unmute yourself. And
yeah, I
jump right
guess
in.
it. Okay. I hear some of my Trump friends who say they don't like him, but they like his policy. And I have a converse comment. I'm a passionate partisan liberal Democrat. I'm not thrilled with Biden's memory issues, but I care about policy. I care about the Supreme Court and abortion. So I will definitely still support him, even though I'm not thrilled with him. And I have a feeling there are many people like me on the Democratic side, similar to the Republican Trumpers, who may not like his behavior, but say they like policy. Well, that's how I feel about Biden.
Pete, if he called you up and said, should I step down for the good of the party and the country, what would you tell him to do? In other words, not run for re-election. Would you advise him not to? Hold on, I think you're muted again. Can't hear you. Can you unmute, Pete? Because I'd love to hear your answer to that. Anybody
Hang on.
else want to weigh in on that? I'd particularly like to hear if you're a liberal Democrat.
I got it.
Yeah, go ahead, Pete. What would you tell him to do?
Yeah, so just in terms of your question, I don't know if it's kind of late, like people were saying, in this stage of the game, and I don't know who the Democrats under at this stage of the game. I remember how fractured the Democrats were in '68 after LBJ pulled out and that whole fiasco year. And ironically, the convention is going to be in Chicago again this year. So,
Pete, let me ask you one more question. Do you share the view that some have that, given his decline, he shouldn't have run in the first place, either in 20 or now?
Well, it's hard to say. I appreciate the question.
I put you on the spot to speak for the whole party. Again, if there's other liberal Democrats on here, I'd love to know what folks think. Raise your hand if you're willing to weigh in. If you're a liberal Democrat, Alicia, go ahead. I'd love to hear what you think about this question of whether he should step down, or whether you feel like about him the way some have felt about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that he made a mistake in going forward under the circumstances.
Well, I don't think he can step down now. It is way too late in the process. There's no way we could get our feet under anybody else. I am a liberal Democrat moderating as we speak.
How do you feel about the special counsel's characterization? Does that bother you in terms of Trump's chances or Biden's chance of staying on the ticket?
I think they overstepped with their editorializing. I don't think it was necessary. I think it was like a half Comey.
Okay. Thank you. I want to ask, because we've talked way more about Joe Biden because of the breaking news than about Donald Trump. Noah and then Melissa. Tell me again, the cleanest scenario you see, if you see any, where Trump's not the nominee, besides dying.
So I missed a lot. Did we?
No, we barely have talked about this because we've been dealing with Biden.
We didn't cover the mysterious brain-eating amoeba infection scenario because
it has not come up yet, but go ahead and run through that one.
It's very hard to see a condition in which the Republican Party decides that their electoral chances are better without Trump than they are with Trump.
Even if he's convicted.
We had a primary in Nevada with a beauty contest.
Yeah.
No delegates awarded. And yet you had 63% of that electorate, and not a small amount of voters, turn out for an election that doesn't matter, just to communicate their displeasure with the fact that there was a primary at all.
Right.
Republican voters are deeply committed.
The other reason I think it's very unlikely that Trump would step down under any circumstances from being the nominee is if he wins, he's less likely to have to go to prison or be confined. So he has every incentive to go forward, even if convicted.
Interestingly enough, Nikki Haley said that very thing today, which is somewhere she's been afraid to go. Most of the party has been afraid to go, to say that Donald Trump is seeking his restoration to office only to absolve him, exculpate him, somehow get him to no longer face criminal jeopardy, at least in these federal charges. And I think that's true. It's kind of hard to avoid, but Republicans are desperate to avoid it because it looks very venal. It doesn't look like it's a high-minded pursuit of high office for the benefit of voters, for your own benefit. It's nevertheless true and accurate. And in the event that something were to happen in these criminal charges that accelerated the pace of the investigations and actually got him in front of the dock on something serious, something perhaps the January 6th case blows open, the Supreme Court decides immunity isn't going to happen, they decide it tomorrow, it goes back to Judge Shutkin, she begins proceedings. That could unlock something in the near future, but it is such an infinitesimal scenario.
Melissa, I wanted you to weigh in a second, but I just want to make one point. Even under this scenario where he is convicted, the people at that point, because by the time he's convicted, he's going to have a majority of the delegates. The people at that point who could force his hand, either by going to him and begging him or changing the rules, are the members of the Republican National Committee. And they are as beholden to Donald Trump as Donald Trump Jr., that group of people. There's some dissidents on the National Committee, but overall, those are his people. So the chance that they would wrest it from him are minimal. Now, the one scenario I've come up with is he's convicted and somehow there's a plea bargain. And the plea bargainers say the only way Joe Biden will pardon you or whatever is if you don't run. But of course, at that point, the Democrats wouldn't want to make the deal because they would think he'd be weak enough to beat. Maybe. Melissa, you have to go soon. So I want to just hear your Trump scenarios, if you have any, of a scenario where he's not the nominee.
There is none. I mean, short of death or him, being in jail and the courts deciding that as a result of that, he can't be on a ballot, it's him. it's him, and we should like stop wasting our breath talking about other scenarios.
Yeah. So you're saying basically at least 50% of this episode is a waste of time.
No, I mean, look, it's fun to have the conversation. But.
Yeah. All right. Melissa's going to need to go soon. So if people have questions for Melissa in particular, a
I
Democrat
actually
who-
have to run right now.
Okay,
but
Melissa, thank
so
you for
much
joining
having
us.
me.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
We're going to go for a little bit longer. I want to scroll around for news. I just got a text from one of the most anti-Trump Republicans I know, who's worked at senior levels of Republican politics, who's not prone to overstatement. And the text says, "This report is devastating." And again, I think a lot of people are going to see it that way. I'm curious if Democrats, we saw at least one senator circle the wagons, but do you think this causes some Democrats to go public and say they're concerned? This is, of course, what Dean Phillips ran his presidential campaign on and didn't break through. But do you think other people now will speak up?
I mean, going back to the primary results situation, South Carolina had a primary and Joe Biden won it in percentage terms, roughly where human body temperature is at. These were North Korean election margins. Joe Biden has the support, if not the affection, of the Democratic Party too. And in part because I think Democrats actually know that if they were to sacrifice their incumbent, there's very few historical parallels that suggest they would emerge victorious in November, particularly since Kamala Harris is waiting in the wings.
Right.
She doesn't command very much support.
Right.
So, no, the prospect here of having to actually come to the logical conclusion this report leads you to is something they will absolutely resist.
Right. So polling, there's the tyranny of polling now that's working against him on this issue and on immigration and some other issues, which is the polling is part of the narrative that reporters and others use to talk about these things, and Republicans have as a talking point. Republicans can say, special counsel's view is the view of a majority of Americans and a lot of Democrats, that he's not up to the job. And the other tyranny of it is, again, it shows the narrative of Biden's behind, he's in trouble, Democrats are panicking. The president's lawyers wrote a letter, as I think part of the record, to the special counsel, two of the president's lawyers, and they said, we quote, "We do not believe that the report's treatment of President Biden's memory is accurate or appropriate." Appropriate, I get. The problem with saying accurate is you don't need to be an insider to know it's not inaccurate. All you need to do is watch him speak to a dead congresswoman, or tell a story about Prime Minister Cole. It's a problem, Chancellor Cole. It's a problem.
It confirms everyone's suspicion.
Anybody else want to comment? Ask a question? Please raise your hand. That is the point of two-way. Don't be shy. Noah does not bite. Melissa does, but she's gone. So if you've got a question, please raise your electronic hand. Love to hear from you. You can make a comment. Tell us why you think your scenario for getting one or both of these guys off the ticket, which, as you know, a majority of Americans would like to see, by the way. I see a hand up that's not electronic, but I'm trying to find who that is. Raise your hand again. I'm finding it hard to find. Can you unmute yourself? See if you can unmute yourself. I'm having hard trouble finding you on my screen, but. And now I think I know who that is even. See if I can find him here. Can somebody help him unmute? Let's see. Apologies. The non-electronic hand is always a little tougher for us at this point. All right. While we wait to see if we can unmute that particular person, anybody else want to ask a question, make a comment, please raise your hand. All right. I see Zoom user. Zoom user, go ahead and unmute yourself. Should be able to unmute. Go ahead right now.
Hello, yes. So my question is, or my comment first, is that I think this makes the Trump VP pick even more important, because I think the best the Democrats can do with this is to say, okay, well, if Biden gets incapacitated and he wins, well, there's Kamala Harris, which is bad, as you all have stated. But I think Trump, if he makes a VP pick who is proven, can use that as an argument against Biden even further, that, hey, in case something happens to me, I'm older, here's this VP pick, who can reassure you if something happens to me.
Great.
And so my question would be, what are your thoughts on that?
Yep.
On that?
No, great question. Thank you for that, Noah.
I think it's a great observation. It's probably accurate. It doesn't fill me with, it doesn't make me any more less satisfied or more satisfied with what the pick is ultimately going to be. When we've seen VP candidates audition for this role, J.D. Vance, Elise Stefanik in particular, they've emphasized what I think is probably accurately Donald Trump's foremost criteria is that they would do what Mike Pence would not. They would have decertified this election. They would have sent it back to the states. Right. And I think that's probably among the criteria that Donald Trump is going to evaluate foremost when he's selecting this candidate. So when you're talking about, maybe if there's an ejection seat option, the second option, if Donald Trump were incapacitated or somehow ejected from office. Look, another option here that was brought up in the Supreme Court today in these arguments was about Section 3, the 14th Amendment. What if, and this is Amy Coney Barrett, what if Congress were to write a law with Donald Trump in office, amend the statute and demonstrate that because he engaged in insurrectionary behavior and Congress has authorized that he could be ejected from office? That's going to be a live proposition in a second Trump term. Right. And Donald Trump will have a vice president there who will have been on the record, if it's Elise Stefanik or J.D. Vance or anybody else who evinces that kind of determination to keep Donald Trump in office, that it will scare Democrats out of that. Right. There will be no second path towards a more normal executive office in the executive branch.
Ron Edwards, unmute yourself. I want to get to your question, but I want to read a text from one of my Democratic friends who is as anti-Trump as anybody I know. I know I keep saying that about people I know, but it's true about all of them. And he says, somewhat disapprovingly of this entire episode, he says, so one guy is a crook and a monster, and one guy is diminished. Yet we talk only about the diminishment thing, not the crook and the monster thing. Give me a break.
I'm on record talking about the crook and monster thing.
Yeah, and the diminishment.
And the diminishment.
All right. Ron Edwards, thank you for joining. We'd love to hear your question or comment.
Yeah, as a Democrat, I think it's going to be critical that we see how the Biden administration gets him out in front of the public in the next couple of days. If he does not get out in front of this and do some press interviews, it's going to be very difficult to overcome this.
Yeah,
I believe.
Ron, it's a great point. And we saw I don't know if you were with us earlier, we took live a little bit of the president speaking to the House Democratic retreat. The problem is when he's rested, he can do it, but he can't always be rested. And again, as was pointed out by my colleague, he did at least one of these special counsel interviews not rested because of October 7th. He'll be rested for the State of the Union, I bet. He'll be rested for his convention acceptance speech. If there are debates, he'll be rested. But as we learned now about October 7th, the president can't always be rested. I think that people said in various articles over the last couple of days, they need a new strategy. The president needs to be out more forcefully making the case. And again, he can't. If he could, he would. He didn't turn down the Super Bowl interview because he didn't want to spoil football. He turned it down because he can't do it.
Worse than that, he declined to address the nation on the embarkation of a very dangerous mission abroad. We are now engaged in multiple theaters of kinetic efforts to restore deterrence in the region and hit Iran's proxies with the aim of intimidating Iran.
I disagree with you about this. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
There's a reason for that. It's the same with the criticism of Trump. When people say he said he'd be a dictator for a day, there's plenty to criticize about Donald Trump. Believe me, there's plenty to criticize. He was kidding when he said he would be a dictator for a day. The reason he didn't talk about this stuff is because he doesn't want to provoke Iran. He doesn't want to be out there. That's a different equity, but it's an important one. And that's the reason they give, and that's plausibly true.
Perhaps, but I'll strongly push back on that. The idea that nations commit themselves to courses as existential as direct conflict with a great superpower, the United States, because of a speech is ludicrous. It's frankly ludicrous. The idea that the speech is somehow more provocative than the strikes that he's talking about is just defies credulity.
It gives them a video to show in the region to whip up. There's no video of the missiles. It's why they chucked bin Laden over the boat. No video makes a huge difference.
I frankly disagree with you just because the calculations in Tehran are... You can make that case perhaps about in the Houthi region.
But people would put it there. I mean, whether it provoked the Iranians or the street, it's the same problem.
Whether it provokes the Iranians or not, frankly, I don't think that's a calculation that should matter. But let's say it does. Do the United States, do U.S. voters, do Americans deserve to be informed about the risks of the concept of the campaign that the president
of course they do,
themselves?
and that's a different equity. That's super important. It's a super important equity. But
But if the president isn't capable of it, that's a fundamental job of the presidency.
but I'm saying in this case, I don't think he didn't do it because he's not capable. They can rest him up and have him read teleprompter from the Oval for 5 minutes. That's not undoable.
Right.
But that's not the reason they didn't do it. They didn't do it because they don't want to provoke.
Either that or they didn't do it because it would have taken place outside of the range of 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. when he said its peak performance.
They could pre-tape it. Question from Jerry. Jerry, go ahead and unmute, please.
Thanks, Mark. I just am so horrified by what's, just happened with Biden. I'm Biden's age. I'm 6 months younger. And in 5 years, when he's still president, or 4.5 years, it's just insane to me to even contemplate that scenario. So I just like someone you've asked, Mark, how old we are, willing to admit, but speak to the 3 years, 4 years from now.
Jerry, if you're comfortable saying thank you for that, did you vote for Joe Biden last time?
Yeah.
Yeah. And would you like to see him not run, or do you think it's too late?
I'm muted. Not. He shouldn't run. I know. I was a successful business person. There's no way at my age I could do what I did.
Yeah.
And it's just like, to me, it's crazy.
Jerry, let me ask you one more question. Do you remember what years
Sure.
you were vice president? It's hard to remember, right?
No, not
Been
that.
through-
I
been-
mean, my memory's much better than his.
Yeah. Jerry, if you could pick the Democratic nominee, who would you pick?
Oh, Lord. Well, I've always loved Gretchen Whitmer, but, at this stage, please, let's talk.
Yeah.
I'm not me.
Okay. Jerry, thank you. Really appreciate it. We've got a couple more minutes. Again, I'd love to get in one more question. Somebody put in the chat, Josh Shapiro. This big mention about the chat. I don't typically read too many things from the chat aloud here. I read them all as I can as we're going through. I don't, in part because I want to encourage you all to ask your questions on video. But I do read them, and I will invoke them some. But if you're disappointed, but I did see somebody in the chat say Josh Shapiro. And again, if you follow my work, I think he's the one Democrat who could step in and do this if necessary.
What about Jared Foltz?
Don't think he could.
No.
Don't think he could for a variety of reasons we don't have time to say. Raise your hand if you'd like to get in the last question of this episode. Raise your hand or comment. Anybody wants to get in, you still can. Time for one more. Going once, going twice. Let me ask you, sir, is this Biden story of the special counsel's report? The photos I haven't even looked at yet, but that's damning. The Republican allegation of double standard will be a Republican talking point and a Trump talking point for the rest of the year. How long does the stuff about his mental capacity sustain? Is this going to be cited from now to the election, or is this going to cycle out of the news cycle in 2 days?
How long have we been talking about Joe Biden's mental decline?
Well, I understand, but I'm saying is this, if you'll pardon the expression, a game changer in the arc of Democrats being concerned about his decline, or voters, even more voters saying he doesn't have the capacity? I mean, I don't know how many more voters could think it or would tell pollsters they think it.
It very well could, because this now transcends partisan talking points. This is coming out of a special counsel from Joe Biden's Justice Department. An objective assessment from investigators on the ground who have no incentive to exaggerate their assessment.
You did a great thing that I've gotten several texts about, but in the rush of this, I hadn't thought through and hadn't brought up, which is, I assume the Attorney General signed off on the report, right?
I couldn't tell you, but
I think I would imagine.
Yeah.
And of course, what some people have already texted me, but again, I sort of didn't process it, is there are plenty of people in Biden world who are already pissed off at this Attorney General. And assuming he did sign off on the report and didn't try to get it taken out, they're going to be more pissed off because, of course, he could have, and there's at least an argument that it doesn't belong in the report.
That's very interesting. I imagine those criticisms will be muted in public. They wouldn't want to demonstrate, fractiousness within the administration, but I'm sure that we're going to hear some leaks, sources not attributable to anybody within the Justice Department, within the administration, who are saying, yeah, we got a bad deal from Merrick.
I'm going to tell my favorite joke about Merrick Garland's lack of political sophistication that hopefully will not be lost on everyone listening, which is Merrick Garland makes Now I'm forgetting the name of the guy. What was Obama's Attorney General? Barack Obama's Eric Holder. Merrick Garland makes Eric Holder look like Rahm Emanuel. That's my joke about his lack of political sophistication. Thank you for joining us. Very much appreciate it. We always start and end at time. We're going to end a little bit early because no one else has their hands raised and Noah and I are talked out. But we appreciate you joining us. As always with Two Way, you'll get a link to the recording. So if you missed some of this or you want to share it with your friends, be on the lookout for that. You'll see a link in the email you got earlier if you're on my Substack to sign up for all our alerts. And as we transition this process, you'll want to be signed up to make sure that you learn about every episode that we're going to do. Appreciate you joining us. The breaking news tilted this conversation more than my friend who texted me wanted towards Biden as opposed to Donald Trump. But our conclusion, at least amongst some of us here, is Biden is more likely to be off the ticket than Trump, but neither is particularly likely. We'll have to see what happens. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here on Two Way soon. Have a great day.